forward here. And all right, what do we got?
All right, hold on. Let me just check this real quick. All right, so I kind of just wanted to generally go over like solving equations using square roots. I mean, not square roots, like using by the square, you know?
Completing the square?
Yeah, completing the square, like what we were doing last time.
Okay.
And I don't have any problems in specific. I kind of just wanted to go over that.
Okay. Well, let's start with a simple one.
And I was, yeah, we were doing that in class today, and I knew how to do that quadratically, just find A, B, and C and plug them in, and just solve it from there. But I wasn't trying to do it by completing the square. I know we went over it last time, but I forgot.
Okay, there's a quadratic that we cannot factor. There are no factors of 17 that subtract to the number 8.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to do this by completing the square, the best way is to get that number on the other side, first of all. And now when you're left with an x squared and an x term only, you can complete the square. So complete the square inside the parentheses. In other words, that's still the same as that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never let it change. That's the secret to completing the square. Always make sure when you go from one line to the next that you don't change anything. You rearrange it, but you don't change it. So how do I complete the square inside the parentheses?
I'm not sure. That's
Take half of the coefficient of the x. In other words, half of 8, and square it.
Yeah. Okay, and then so if you square 4, so it's 2.
Square it.
Or 16.
16. Okay.
Yeah,
now the moment I write 16 there, I've changed the equation.
So you got to get rid of 16 somewhere? Or?
No, I got to add it to the other side.
Oh, okay.
You can always add the same number to both sides of an equation. Now this equation is the same as the original.
Yeah.
And the advantage, by completing the square, I can now write this as x plus 4 squared. In other words, I can write it as a linear term.
Okay.
Okay. You with me?
Yeah, okay.
Now what's the next step?
I don't know. I'm kind of just following your lead.
Take the square root of both sides.
Okay.
What do you get when you take the square root of both sides?
So square root of 4 is 2 and square root of 33 is...
No. If I take the square root of the left side...
Oh, so the whole thing in total. Okay.
And that square root...
You just kind of leave it like that.
Gets rid of the square, so that becomes x plus 4.
Okay, and then 33, I don't think that has a square, or at least a whole number, at least.
You're right. And it's actually plus or minus root 33. So I still haven't changed anything. What I'm looking at down there is the same as up there. Now, to solve for x, what's the last step?
You'd subtract 4 from...
Okay, and I'm going to put that 4 there because that's where it usually goes. In other words, had you solved this by using the quadratic formula, you would have gotten this answer right there.
Okay. Negative 4 plus square root of 33.
Plus or minus the square root of 33. Okay.
All right.
Let's do one more, and this time I want you to do it.
I got an example one.
Huh?
I can think of an example one. Let's do x squared plus 5 equals 17.
5 or 5x?
Just 5.
Okay. What's the first thing? Whenever you see a square, you're trying to isolate that first of all, and then you're going to take the square root of both sides after you isolate it. So what do I have to do to isolate it?
Would you subtract 17 from both sides, or would you do something else?
I would subtract 5. The x squared's already on the left side.
Oh, that's fair, yeah.
I've got to get my x's. This is a quadratic, but it's not a hard quadratic because there's no x term.
Okay.
When there's no x term, it's quite simple. I'm just going to subtract 5 from both sides.
So x squared equals 12.
Now what?
And then just square root both sides? Or?
Okay, so the answer is what? X equals what?
Square root of 12.
Remember, whenever you solve an equation by taking the square root, start your answer with the words plus or minus 100% of the time.
Okay.
That way you won't...
Plus or minus 12.
Yep, everybody forgets that plus or minus, and I guarantee you that will cost you points on a test.
Okay.
Okay, unless you're solving a geometry problem where the minus is never considered because you can't have a negative dimension. Okay. All
right.
So that's pretty easy. In other words, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to complete the square. I didn't have to use the quadratic. That can be simplified. Have we talked about that? Simplifying radicals?
No.
That's something you have had to do?
Not yet, no.
Not yet?
I don't think. No, I don't think so.
I'm thinking that if you've had the quadratic formula, they want you to simplify radicals.
If I have a calculator, then probably.
Well, this is going to be an irrational number. So if you put that into a calculator, it's going to round it off to some decimal. Mm-hmm. That's not usually what they want. I'm not sure exactly at what point it is, whether it's in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 or geometry, where they stop having you give decimal answers. They want radical answers. And if you're going to give a radical answer, they want it simplified. So let me just do one of these for you and see if you recognize it. In other words, the square root of 12 would be equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. And the square root of 4 is a whole number. So that's how I would simplify it. I'm never giving my answer as root 12. I'm giving always as 2.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
That makes sense, yeah.
And that you'll learn it if you haven't learned it yet. We probably don't need to go there. Let's cover the stuff that you're working on right now. Do you have any others, or did you just make that last one up, or?
No, that's a one on my paper.
Oh, okay.
So this, I have another one right here. X squared minus 14 equals negative 14. So x squared equals 0, so x equals 0. I can just do that in my head.
You got it. Basically cross those out, leaving 0. So x squared equals 0. This is the one time you don't have to use the words plus or minus. So all this time I've been telling students 100% of the time, only when it's equal to 0 do you not need the plus or minus.
So 99.99%.
I hadn't even realized it until now. That there was one time where you didn't need the plus or minus. Okay. Yeah. What else you got, Sully?
X, it's in parentheses, x plus 2 squared equals 64. So wait, hold on. I could actually probably do this.
Okay, good. What's the first step?
So you'd, hold on, I'm just trying to think. So would you subtract 2 from both sides?
Oh, that 2 is inside the parentheses.
Yeah.
In other words, what's being squared is x plus 2. Okay?
Yeah.
So let's take the square root of both sides.
So x would be 6, right? Because, I mean, I don't know how you get that. I just know 8 squared equals 64.
1 second. Boy, my allergies, this wind has really kicked them up.
Yeah, it's all right.
When I take the square root of the left, I am left with what?
Square root to the left. Oh, you just have x plus 2.
When I take the square root of the right, what do I have? Remember always what you should
8.
start your answer with?
Plus or minus 8.
That's going to make a difference. It's going to give us two different answers. So now I still got to subtract 2 from both sides. So here's my answer, minus 2 plus or minus 8. So what are my two number answers? If you translate
it's 6 and negative 10.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure you knew exactly what that meant.
Yeah, 1 second. Hey, what's up? Okay, my bad. Okay. All right, I'll be up in a minute. I'm doing my math tutor.
All right, what else you got, Sully?
Got 4x squared plus 25 equals negative 75.
4x squared plus 25 equals what?
Negative 75.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Proceed.
So you subtract 25 from both sides. So 4x squared equals negative 100, or plus or minus.
No, we didn't take square root of anything yet.
Okay. Then you just divide 100 by 4, and then it'd be, no, would it?
Yeah.
Would you? Okay.
In other words, whenever you're solving an equation, you're always trying to get down to the final step, which is that.
Yeah.
So
x
you
equals
get rid
negative
of everything.
5.
In other words, I had to get rid of the 25. I had to get rid of the 4. Now I got x squared. How do I get rid of the exponent?
Square root it.
Okay. What's
Square
the
root both sides.
problem? What's the problem here?
I mean, you just get x. Oh, plus. Oh, yeah. Plus or minus.
Well, that's not the problem. The problem is the square root of a negative number.
Okay.
Have you had imaginary numbers?
No, we haven't really gotten into that yet.
Well, that's what you have to solve this. In other words, if you haven't had imaginary numbers, then this is a no solution.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. That's why I said really when you gave it to me, is I could see that it was going to be the square root of a negative number. And unless this was plus 75, then that would change a lot. But no, when you get something, notice why. You give me a solution to that. There is no number. There's no number that when you multiply it by itself that it ends up negative. None.
Oh.
You multiply minus 5 times minus 5, you get plus 25.
Okay.
So this is basically impossible. X squared cannot equal a negative number. Now, the math of imaginary numbers is a very interesting subject and the subject of a lot of higher math. A lot of higher math depends on this invention that we invented of imaginary numbers. But I don't want to get to them unless you've had them. This problem puzzles me a little bit because I don't know why they would give this to you.
Yeah.
If you hadn't had imaginary numbers. Now, the answer, if you have had imaginary numbers, is 5i, plus or minus 5i.
Okay.
With I being the square root of minus 1. That's what I means.
Okay. I get that.
Okay. Yeah, it's not really hard. A lot of people think complex numbers are hard, but they're not really. They're rather simple. It's a simple subject.
Yeah.
What else you got?
In parentheses, x minus 1 squared equals 0.
First step.
Square root both sides.
Next line.
Then you'd add 1 to both sides.
What's the next line? In other words, when you say square
Oh,
root both sides, I need the next line. I want to make sure you
oh,
are
so
correct. That's the next step, is to square root both sides. But
yeah.
that's not the next line. What is the next line? What
I
happens when
guess
you square
since
root
it's
both
minus 1,
sides?
that another? Is that another I? Because
No, you can take the
negative
square
1.
root of 0. No, hold on. No. In other words, is all I did here was I took the square root of the left side and I took the square root of the right side.
Okay.
And this radical sign cancels out with that 2.
All right.
So you're left with x minus 1. Square root of 0 is 0. I don't need a plus or minus. 0 is neither plus nor minus. And now what's the
Oh,
last
so
line?
just x equals 1. You'd add 1 to
That's
both
it.
sides.
Yep.
Oh, would it be plus or minus 1 or?
No, I
No.
didn't take, when I say it's the plus or minus, it has
Oh,
to
I
be
get that. I
the
get that.
very
Yeah.
next step.
Yeah. Okay. I understand that because it was on the square was on the
I
outside
didn't
of the
take the
parentheses.
square root of both sides to do that. I added 1 to
Okay.
both sides. Where I took the square root of both sides was in that step. And if you like it, I could put a plus minus in there, but plus minus 0 is the same as 0. So you
Yeah.
don't use a plus or minus in front of 0.
Okay. And then 19 equals 30 minus 5x squared.
What's the next thing to do here?
So you would I don't know since the 30 isn't on the right side. Would
Well,
you add what would you subtract 19 from both sides?
yeah, but more generally speaking, my next goal is to get everything with x on one side of the equation and every number on the other.
Okay.
Which side do I want to put the x's on?
The right side? Or the left? I don't know.
Uh,
Probably the right, because the 5x is
Probably
already over there.
doesn't. Actually, there's nothing wrong with your answer. Minus 5x squared is what, if I leave it on the right side, well, how did I get that? I subtracted 30 from both sides, right?
Yeah.
Which gives me minus 11 there. And now
Yeah.
the fact that I have a negative sign and a negative sign, I can divide both sides by negative 1.
So 11 equals 5x squared.
Okay, next line.
Square root both sides.
Not yet. We're trying to
Um,
isolate that if we can. And in this case,
so
I
divide by
can by
5.
dividing by 5. Yeah.
Okay.
So now I got x squared equals 11 fifths. And the last line, what's x equal to?
X is equal to, because you have to square root both of them, right? So it'd be the square root of 11 over 5.
Almost. You'll get it. By the time I end up reminding you every time you miss it, you'll know.
Oh, plus or minus
Okay.
square root of 11 over 5.
Yes. And like I said, that's not trivial. You will lose points without that plus or minus. That is 2
Okay.
answers, as opposed to just 1 answer that you were going to get.
Okay.
Okay?
Final solution.
And
That. Right.
quadratics almost always have 2 answers. Whenever you see a quadratic, 98% of the time you will get 2 different answers. The only time you get exactly 1 answer is if that parabola exactly comes down and touches the x-axis and goes back up, that's your only answer. There's only 1. But most of the time that parabola is going like that. And so you have 2 answers.
Okay. I get that.
So, but always expect 2 answers and then be surprised when you only get 1. Because that way you won't forget that plus or minus if you're expecting 2 answers.
Okay, cool. I get that.
Okay. You got any more completing the squares? Because actually the problems we've just been doing are easier than the completing the square. The completing the square is a process that a lot of my students have troubles with. So,
I don't think I have any more. Actually, no, yeah, I do.
okay.
X squared plus 6x minus 40 equals 0.
Now, can I factor that?
I don't think so.
Well, let's try. And the reason I say let's try is because factoring is by far the easiest method of solving a quadratic if it can be factored.
Okay.
And you never get too much practice factoring. So what's the first step of factoring this?
You square root it.
Split up the x's.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't done much factoring,
Yeah.
have we?
No, I haven't done a lot of factoring.
Okay. Did they teach you a method called the California method or anything?
I think I've heard that before. I don't think I ever learned it though.
All right. Well, in the last 4 minutes here, let me teach you a little factoring, because if there's one thing you're going to need over the next 4 years, it's the ability to factor. Now, a lot of people really do have trouble with it. I believe I have a very simple method on simple quadratics. This is a simple quadratic. Okay? First step, split up the x's. I've just done that. Second step, determine both signs. Well, how do I know that the signs are opposite one another?
Because it's negative.
Last step of FOIL produces that number.
So yeah, it has to be opposite because it's negative.
They wouldn't be able to be the same signs. If they were the same signs, that would have to be a plus 40.
Okay.
So the first thing you do when you learn how to factor a quadratic is you examine that sign right there. That tells you what both signs are going to be.
Okay.
Okay. And then the third rule is rather simple. I need factors of 40 that subtract because of that same sign, that same minus sign.
Okay.
Factors of 40 that subtract to the number 6.
Let's think here. There's 20 and 2, 10 and 4. 10 and 4, 10 and negative 4.
Now the fourth step.
So would that be x plus 10, x minus 4?
Yes, you put the larger factor, the 10, with the sign of the middle term, which is plus.
Okay, I get that.
Okay, and now we still haven't quite solved it, but we're down to a point where I have two things. That thing multiplied by that thing equals 0. So what's my solution for x?
Wouldn't that be the final thing, or?
No.
Oh, no, it wouldn't. Because you'd have to solve 4x.
Yeah, x equals, and there's two answers.
Would that be? I'm trying to think here.
When you, a very important.
Just 10 and negative 4, or no?
Almost. An important rule of algebra, probably the most fundamental, is when you get two things multiplied together that are equal to 0, one of those things has to be 0. You can't find two numbers that multiply together that are equal to 0. You can add two numbers that equal 0, but there's no way to multiply two numbers. Unless one of them is 0, the product will never come out to be 0. So the way we solve this is I let this one equal 0, and I solve it. X equals minus 10, that's one solution. And the other way, and I let that one equal 0, which means x equals 4.
Okay.
So that's how you solve it when you can factor it. And I was able to factor that. So I didn't have to do a complete the square. I didn't have to use a quadratic formula.
Yeah, okay, that just clicked. I get that.
No, and I didn't need to do square roots. In other words, A lot of quadratics that you're going to come across in your math career are going to be factorable. They like to test your factoring ability.
Yeah.
And if you can solve it by factoring, that's almost always the easiest way. Much easier than completing the square, much easier than the quadratic formula.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Nice. I actually like that because I can actually understand that.
Yeah, we should work more on factoring on Thursday.
Okay, yeah.
Just because that's something I'm 100% sure that that's a skill you need, and you need to be good at it. And I can get you good at it. I can.
Okay, cool.
Even if I have to make them up, I can do that.
Cool.
Okay?
All right.
Sully, I will talk to you at 6 o'clock on Thursday.
All right, cool. Gotcha. Thank you.
Bye-bye.